The mop made wet streaks across the polished floor as Roy Palmer pushed it back and forth. His shoulders ached from 10 hours of cleaning, but he had 2 more levels to finish before his shift ended. Around him, Danyland Station buzzed with life. Aliens from 100 different worlds walked past, barely noticing the human in the gray maintenance uniform. Roy didn't mind being invisible. After 20 years of janitorial work, he had learned that people spoke more freely when they thought no one important was listening. Tonight everyone was talking about the same thing. The Draconis had arrived. He paused near a viewing port and looked out at the docking bay. 3 massive ships sat there, their hulls covered in golden scales that caught the light. The Draconis were dragon-like creatures from a planet called Scoreth. They stood nearly 12 feet tall, with wings that could span 20 feet when fully extended. Their scales shimmered with inner fire, and their eyes held an ancient intelligence that made most species feel small and young. The galaxy respected the Draconis. Some species even worshipped them. They were strong, wise, and powerful. Their technology was thousands of years ahead of humanity's. When they spoke in the Galactic Council, everyone listened. Roy went back to mopping. He had work to do, and dragon visitors didn't change that. His bucket was almost empty, so he headed toward the service elevator that would take him down to the lower levels. The waste disposal area was his last stop for the night. The elevator descended through the station's levels. The higher floors were clean and bright, filled with shops and restaurants. The middle levels held living quarters and offices, but the lower levels were different. Down here the walls were metal and pipes, and the air smelled like recycled water and old machinery. Most species never came down here. They didn't want to see where their garbage went or how their air got cleaned. Roy stepped out of the elevator and pulled his cleaning cart behind him. The disposal area was quiet except for the hum of the compactors. He had just started sorting through the recycling bins when he heard something, a soft sound like breathing but rough and painful. He froze and listened. There it was again, coming from behind the large trash compactor in the corner. Roy grabbed his flashlight and walked slowly toward the sound. His heart beat faster. Sometimes animals snuck onto the station in cargo shipments. Once he had found a 6-legged creature from Teller 9 that had tried to bite him. He shined his light behind the compactor and gasped. A dragon lay there, curled into a ball. But this wasn't like the magnificent Draconis he had seen in the docking bay. This one was small, maybe only 7 feet long including the tail. Its scales were dark red, almost black, and they looked dull instead of shining. One wing was bent at a wrong angle and deep cuts marked its side. The dragon's eyes were closed and each breath seemed to cause pain. Roy stood there, frozen. He should call security. That was the rule. But something stopped him. The dragon looked so young and so hurt. It reminded him of the stray dogs he used to help back on Earth before he came to work on the station. He knelt down slowly and spoke in a soft voice. "Hey there. I'm not going to hurt you." The dragon's eyes opened. They were golden, but the light in them was dim. The creature tried to lift its head, then gave up and let it fall back down. Roy made a decision. He ran back to his cart and grabbed the emergency medical kit he always carried. It wasn't much, just bandages and antiseptic, but it was better than nothing. He also took his lunch, a sandwich and a bottle of water from his bag. When he returned, the dragon was watching him with those tired golden eyes. Roy opened the water bottle and held it near the dragon's mouth. "Here, you need a drink." The dragon stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly it opened its mouth. Roy poured water carefully, letting the creature drink. When the bottle was empty, he broke his sandwich into small pieces and offered them. The dragon ate slowly as if it hadn't had food in days. When the sandwich was gone, Roy examined the injuries. The cuts weren't deep, but they looked infected. He cleaned them as gently as he could, talking the whole time to keep the dragon calm. "You're going to be okay," he said, though he wasn't sure if that was true. "I'll figure something out." As he worked, Roy noticed something strange. Around the dragon's neck was a metal collar with symbols he couldn't read, but one symbol he recognized. It was the mark of the Draconis delegation, the same symbol he had seen on their ships. This dragon belonged to them. Or had belonged to them. Why would they leave it here to die? When Roy finished bandaging the worst injuries, he sat back and thought. He couldn't leave the dragon here. The compactors would run automatically in 2 hours, and anything behind them would be crushed. but taking it with him broke about 15 station regulations. If he got caught, he would lose his job. Maybe worse. The dragon made a small sound almost like a whimper. Roy looked into those golden eyes and saw something he recognized. Pain, yes, but also fear and loneliness. He thought about his daughter Beth, who worked as a junior engineer 3 levels up. She would tell him this was crazy. She would remind him that they were barely getting by as it was, that they couldn't afford any trouble. But Roy also thought about his wife, Maria, who had died 5 years ago. She had gotten sick, and the station doctors had put her on a waiting list because human medical care was considered low priority. She had waited 3 months for treatment. By then it was too late. The galaxy had rules about who mattered and who didn't, about who deserved help and who could be left behind. Roy had never liked those rules. He made up his mind. "Okay," he said to the dragon. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to hide you in my cleaning cart under some tarps. My quarters are small, but they're warm and safe." "Can you move?" The dragon looked at him with what might have been surprise. Then slowly it tried to stand. Its legs shook and the injured wing dragged on the ground, but it managed to get up. Roy helped the dragon into his large cleaning cart, covering it with tarps and bags. "Stay quiet," he whispered. "We've got to get through 3 checkpoints." As he pushed the cart toward the service elevator, Roy's hands trembled. He was a simple janitor, nothing special. But tonight he was going to save a life, even if nobody would ever know about it, even if the whole galaxy thought this creature wasn't worth saving. The elevator doors closed and they began to rise. 3 days had passed since Roy brought the dragon home. His quarters were barely large enough for one person, let alone a 7-foot dragon with wings. The dragon spent most of the time curled up in the corner near the heating vent, sleeping and healing. Roy had used half his monthly salary to buy protein supplements from the station market. He told the vendor they were for his own workout routine. The vendor, a blue-skinned Rothian, had laughed at the idea of a middle-aged human trying to build muscle. Roy had smiled and paid without arguing. Now he sat on his small bed watching the dragon eat the supplement mix he had prepared. The creature's scales looked a bit brighter than before, and the cuts were healing. The wing was still a problem, though. Roy had tried to set it as best he could, but he wasn't a doctor. "I wish you could tell me your name," Roy said quietly. The dragon looked up at him with those golden eyes. There was more life in them now, more awareness. A soft knock on the door made Roy's heart jump. He stood up quickly, positioning himself between the door and the dragon. "Who is it?" "Dad, it's me." "Open up, Beth, Roy's daughter." He had been avoiding her calls for 3 days, knowing she would sense something was wrong. He should have known she would come looking for him. Roy opened the door just wide enough to slip outside, closing it quickly behind him. Beth stood in the corridor, her arms crossed. She had her mother's dark eyes and stubborn expression. "You've been avoiding me," she said. "I've been busy with work." "You're a terrible liar, Dad." Beth tried to look past him into the room. "What's going on?" "Are you sick?" "No, I'm fine." "Then why won't you let me in?" Before Roy could stop her, Beth pushed past him and opened the door. She froze when she saw the dragon. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Beth slowly turned to look at her father. "Dad, please tell me that's not what I think it is." "I can explain. You have a Draconis in your quarters." "A Draconis? Do you know what they'll do to you if they find out?" Beth's voice rose with each word. "They'll arrest you. They'll deport you back to Earth, maybe worse." The dragon made a low sound, almost like a growl. Beth took a step back. "She's scared," Roy said, moving to stand beside the dragon. He placed his hand gently on her neck and the growling stopped. "Look at her, Beth, really look. She's hurt and alone. Someone threw her away like garbage." Beth stared at the dragon. After a moment, her expression softened slightly. "Where did you find her?" "In the disposal area. She was left behind the compactors to die." "The Draconis did this?" Roy nodded. "She has their mark on her collar." Beth moved closer, her engineer's curiosity overcoming her fear. She examined the dragon carefully, noting the dull scales and the injured wing. "She's different from the others, smaller. Her coloring is wrong too." "I think that's why they left her," Roy said. "She doesn't fit their idea of what a Draconis should be." Beth was quiet for a long time. Finally, she sighed. "You can't keep her here, Dad. Eventually, someone will find out." "I know. But I couldn't just leave her to die." "I'm not saying you should have." Beth sat down on the bed, rubbing her tired eyes. "I'm saying we need a plan. And maybe some help. We? Beth looked up at her father and smiled slightly. You're an idiot, but you're my idiot. Mom would have done the same thing. Roy felt emotion tighten his throat. Your mom would have done it better. Yeah, she would have. Beth turned to look at the dragon again. We need someone who knows about xenobiology. Someone we can trust, Dr. Cross, Roy said suddenly. The human scientist who works in the research lab. She helped me once when I asked about proper recycling for biological waste. She seemed kind. Nina Cross? I know her. She's good. Beth nodded slowly. But we're asking her to risk her career. I'm asking her, Roy said firmly. Not you. If this goes wrong, I won't let you get in trouble. Too late for that, Dad. I'm already in trouble. Beth stood up and walked slowly toward the dragon. She held out her hand carefully. Hey there. I'm Beth. I'm going to try to help you, okay? The dragon watched her with those intelligent golden eyes. Then very slowly she stretched her neck forward and touched her nose to Beth's hand. Beth smiled. She's beautiful, Dad, in her own way. Over the next few hours, Beth contacted Dr. Cross and convinced her to come to Roy's quarters. The scientist arrived late at night, carrying a medical scanner and a concerned expression. Dr. Nina Cross was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes. She examined the dragon thoroughly, running her scanner over every inch of scales and wing. The dragon tolerated it all patiently, seeming to understand they were trying to help. This is remarkable, Dr. Cross said finally. And terrible. What do you mean? Roy asked. This dragon isn't defective. She's different. Dr. Cross pulled up images on her scanner and showed them to Roy and Beth. See these readings? Her internal temperature is lower than a typical Draconis. Her scale density is different. Even her bone structure has variations, so she's sick? No, she's evolved. Dr. Cross looked at the dragon with wonder. I'd need to do more research to be sure, but I think she represents a subspecies of Draconis. One that adapted for different purposes than the warrior caste that dominates their society now. What kind of purposes? Beth asked. I don't know yet. But look at this. Dr. Cross pointed to readings on her scanner. Her fire glands are smaller but more precisely controlled. Her sensory organs are more developed. She's built for precision and subtlety, not raw power. Roy knelt beside the dragon. So there's nothing wrong with you. They threw you away because you were different. The dragon made a soft sound and Roy could have sworn he saw sadness in her eyes. I need to access the Draconis historical database, Dr. Cross said. There might be information about dragons like her, but that's going to be difficult without raising suspicion. Do what you can, Roy said. In the meantime, I'll take care of her. Dr. Cross nodded and prepared to leave. At the door, she paused. Roy, this is dangerous. If the Draconis find out you have her, they won't just arrest you. They'll demand her return so they can finish what they started. Then they won't find out, Roy said simply. After Dr. Cross left, Beth stayed for a while longer. She helped Roy set up a better sleeping area for the dragon and showed him how to adjust the room's temperature controls to make it more comfortable. She needs a name, Beth said. We can't just keep calling her the dragon. Roy thought for a moment, watching the way the heating vent made the dragon's scales glow softly in the dim light. Ember, her name is Ember, Beth smiled. Ember, I like it. The dragon Ember lifted her head at the sound of her new name. She looked at Roy and for the first time, he saw something like trust in those golden eyes. Welcome to the family, Ember, Roy said softly. That night, Roy lay in his bed while Ember slept in the corner. He thought about what he had done, about the risks he was taking. Any reasonable person would say he was being foolish. He was a janitor, nobody important. He couldn't protect Ember forever. Eventually, the truth would come out. But when he looked at Ember sleeping peacefully, her injured wing tucked carefully against her side, Roy knew he had made the right choice. The galaxy had rules about who mattered and who didn't. But Roy had his own rules now. Everyone deserved someone who would fight for them. Even a dragon that nobody else wanted. The announcement came through the station's public address system at exactly noon. Roy was cleaning the observation deck when he heard it and his blood turned cold. Attention all residents of Danyland Station. Security is conducting a mandatory sweep of all residential areas. This is by order of Administrator Wellis and the visiting Draconis delegation. All residents must allow security teams access to their quarters within the next 48 hours. Failure to comply will result in immediate detention. Around Roy, aliens of every species began murmuring. A Rothian merchant complained loudly about invasion of privacy. A Pelian family wondered what the search was about. But Roy knew exactly what they were looking for. Ember. His hands shook as he gripped the mop handle. He had to get back to his quarters. He had to warn Beth. He had to move Ember somewhere safe. But where? The station had cameras everywhere. Security teams would search every corner. Roy abandoned his cleaning cart and ran for the elevator. His supervisor would be angry, but that didn't matter now. Nothing mattered except keeping Ember safe. When he reached his quarters, he found Beth already there. She was pacing back and forth while Ember watched her with worried eyes. The dragon had grown stronger over the past week. Her scales were brighter and the cuts had healed, but she still couldn't fly with her damaged wing. "You heard the announcement," Beth said as soon as Roy entered. "We need to move her." "Where, Dad? Where can we possibly hide a dragon on a space station?" Roy thought frantically. Then an idea came to him. The maintenance tunnels. The old section that runs beneath the water recycling plant. Nobody goes down there anymore because of the heat. The heat that almost killed 3 engineers last year? Beth shook her head. "Ember might survive it, but we can't go with her. She'd be alone." "I can stay with her," Roy said. "I've worked in hot environments before." "For how long?" "They said 48 hours. You'd die of dehydration." Ember made a sound, a low rumble that seemed to come from deep in her chest. Both Roy and Beth turned to look at her. The dragon stood up and walked to Roy, pressing her head against his chest. Roy put his arms around her neck, feeling the warmth of her scales. "We'll figure something out," he whispered. "I promise." A knock on the door made them all freeze. Roy gestured for Beth to take Ember into the bathroom while he answered. Dr. Cross stood in the corridor, looking nervous. "Let me in, quickly." Roy pulled her inside and locked the door. "Did you hear?" "Everyone heard. The whole station is talking about it." Dr. Cross pulled out her data pad. "But I found something. Something important." Beth emerged from the bathroom with Ember following behind. Dr. Cross's eyes widened when she saw how much the dragon had improved. "She looks so much better," the scientist said. "The wing is still a problem, but her overall health has improved significantly." "What did you find?" Beth asked urgently. Dr. Cross activated her data pad and a holographic image appeared above it. The image showed ancient text and drawings of dragons. But these dragons looked different from the powerful Draconis everyone knew. They were smaller, with darker scales. "I hacked into the Draconis historical archives," Dr. Cross explained. "It took me 3 days and nearly got me caught twice, but I found this. It's from over 5,000 years ago, before the warrior caste took control of Draconis society." Roy leaned closer to study the images. "What am I looking at?" "Proof that Ember isn't defective. She's a Dimfire dragon. That's what they were called. They were healers, builders, and mediators. While the warrior dragons fought and conquered, the Dimfire dragons maintained harmony and healed the wounded." Dr. Cross scrolled through more images. They had different abilities. Their fire was cooler and more controlled. They could sense the flow of energy in living things and in technology. They were essential to Draconis civilization. "What happened to them?" Beth asked. The warrior caste saw them as weak. As their power grew, they began eliminating the Dimfire dragons, called them genetic failures. Within a few generations, they were almost extinct. Dr. Cross looked at Ember sadly. The Draconis have spent thousands of years trying to erase the memory that their species was once diverse. Roy felt anger burning in his chest. They threw Ember away because she reminded them of something they tried to destroy. Exactly. And they'll destroy her if they find her, because she's proof that the Dimfire bloodline still exists. "Then we need to tell everyone," Beth said. "We need to show them what we found." "With what proof?" Dr. Cross gestured at her data pad. "I obtained this information illegally. The moment I present it, they'll arrest me for hacking, and they'll take Ember anyway. So what do we do?" Roy asked. Dr. Cross was quiet for a moment. "We need to demonstrate what Ember can do. We need to show the galaxy that she has value they can't ignore." "How?" Before Dr. Cross could answer, Ember moved. She walked past all of them to the wall where Roy's old equipment panel was mounted. The panel controlled his quarters' environmental systems, but it had been malfunctioning for months. Roy had filed 3 repair requests, but maintenance always said it was low priority. Ember raised one claw and placed it gently on the panel. The dull scales on her claw began to glow softly with inner light. A thin stream of flame, almost white in color, flowed from her claw into the panel's circuits. The lights in the room flickered, then steadied. The temperature, which had been stuck at 62 degrees for weeks, adjusted to a comfortable 70. The air circulation, which always made a grinding noise, became silent and smooth. Ember stepped back and her scales stopped glowing. She looked at Roy as if to say, "See? I can help." Dr. Cross stared at the panel in amazement. She interfaced with the technology. "I've never seen anything like it." She didn't just repair it, she understood it. "Can other Draconis do that?" Beth asked. "Not that I've ever heard of. Their fire is too hot, too uncontrolled. It would melt the circuits, not repair them." Dr. Cross began typing notes frantically on her data pad. "This is incredible. Ember's abilities could revolutionize how we maintain technology. She could prevent malfunctions before they happen, repair complex systems that would take engineers days to fix." Roy knelt beside Ember and stroked her neck. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" Ember made a sound that was almost like a purr. "This is good," Beth said, pacing again. "But it's not enough. We need more time to document her abilities. Time we don't have." "Then we need to buy time," Roy said. He stood up, a plan forming in his mind. "Dr. Cross, can you create a fake report? Something that says you examined all the lower-level areas and found no unauthorized life forms? They'll want to verify it themselves." "I know, but it might delay them by a day or two. That's all we need." Roy turned to Beth. "You still have friends in the engineering department, right? People who trust you?" "A few. Why?" "Because we're going to need help moving Ember through the station, and we're going to need people to look the other way at the right moments." Beth understood immediately. "You want to create a network. Humans helping humans, not just humans. Anyone who's ever been treated as less important by the station authorities. Anyone who's been put on a waiting list or told their problems are low priority." Roy felt something shift inside him. He had spent 20 years being invisible, accepting his place at the bottom of the station's hierarchy. But not anymore. There are a lot of us, more than the administrators realize. Over the next few hours, they made their plans. Dr. Cross would submit her false report to security, claiming she had personally inspected the lower levels. Beth would contact her friends in engineering and other departments, carefully recruiting people she trusted, and Roy would move Ember to a safer location, using the maintenance tunnels that only janitors and repair workers knew about. It was risky. It might not work. But it was better than giving up. As Roy prepared to leave with Ember, Dr. Cross stopped him. "Roy, you understand what you're doing, right? You're not just hiding one dragon anymore. You're organizing resistance against station authority. If this fails, a lot of people will suffer." Roy looked at Ember, at Beth, and at Dr. Cross, 3 beings who had chosen to help, despite the risk, 3 people who believed that doing the right thing mattered more than following unjust rules. "I understand," Roy said. "But I also understand that staying silent hasn't protected anyone. My wife died because humans weren't considered important enough for timely medical care. How many others have suffered because the galaxy has decided they don't matter?" He walked to the door, then paused and looked back. "Ember matters. And if saving her means fighting the system that threw her away, then that's what I'll do." Beth smiled at her father with pride. Dr. Cross nodded with determination. And Ember, the dragon that nobody wanted, stood tall beside the janitor who refused to let her die. The security teams found Roy on the second day of their search. He was cleaning the market district, working his normal shift as if nothing was wrong. 6 armed guards surrounded him, their weapons drawn. Captain Roth, the Brevian security chief, led them. His 4 eyes glowed red with anger. "Roy Palmer, you are under arrest for harboring an unauthorized life form and violating station regulations." Roy put down his mop slowly. He had known this moment would come. Around them, hundreds of station residents stopped to watch. Aliens of every species gathered in a circle, curious about the commotion. "I haven't done anything wrong," Roy said calmly. "We have evidence that you removed a Draconis from station disposal and have been hiding her in violation of diplomatic protocols." Captain Roth stepped closer, his large form towering over Roy. "Where is the creature?" "She's not a creature. Her name is Ember and she's safe. You admit to the crime?" "I admit to saving a life that your people decided wasn't worth saving." Roy looked around at all the watching faces. "Is that a crime? To help someone who's hurt and alone?" Murmurs spread through the crowd. A human merchant nodded. A Pelian mother held her child closer. Take him, Captain Roth ordered. The guards grabbed Roy's arms and pulled them behind his back. The restraints they placed on his wrists were cold and tight. As they led him away, Roy looked back at the crowd one last time. He caught sight of Beth standing near the back, tears on her face but determination in her eyes. Everything was going according to plan. They brought Roy to the administration center, to a large room where Administrator Wellis waited. The Torgathi bureaucrat sat behind an expensive desk, his tentacles moving with irritation. Beside him stood 3 members of the Draconis delegation, including their leader, Elder Frost. Elder Frost was the largest Draconis Roy had ever seen. His scales were silver white and his eyes held centuries of pride and power. When he spoke, his voice rumbled like thunder. "Human, where is the defective one?" Roy met his gaze without flinching. "If you mean Ember, she's somewhere you can't hurt her. The creature belongs to the Draconis. You had no right to interfere. You left her to die in a trash compactor. You gave up any rights when you did that." Elder Frost's eyes flashed with anger. "You know nothing of our ways. The weak must be removed so the strong can thrive. It is the foundation of our civilization." "Then your civilization is built on cruelty," Roy said quietly. The room went silent. Administrator Wellis made a choking sound. The Draconis delegation members spread their wings in anger. Elder Frost stepped forward until he was directly in front of Roy. "You dare insult the Draconis in their presence? You, a mere janitor of a primitive species? I dare to say what's true. You're afraid of Ember because she's different, because she reminds you that there might be another way to live beyond strength and domination." Enough. Administrator Wellis stood up, his tentacles waving frantically. "Roy Palmer, you are charged with theft of property, violation of diplomatic protocols, and endangering station security. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, don't be absurd. You admitted your actions. I admitted to saving a life. That's not a crime." Roy turned to look directly at Elder Frost. "And Ember isn't property. She's a living being with her own value and purpose." "The hearing will determine your guilt," Administrator Wellis said. "In the meantime, you will remain in detention. Guards, take him to the holding cells." As they led Roy out, he heard Elder Frost speak to the administrator. "Find the defective one. Search every corner of this station, and when you find her, bring her to me. I will finish what should have been done on Skorath." Roy smiled to himself. They wouldn't find Ember, not where she was now. The holding cell was small and cold. Roy sat on the hard bench and waited. Hours passed. He thought about his daughter, about Dr. Cross, about all the people who had agreed to help. He thought about his wife, Maria, and hoped she would be proud of what he was doing. The door opened and Beth slipped inside. She wore an engineering uniform and carried a toolkit, looking like she was there for maintenance work. 5 minutes, she whispered. "That's all I could arrange. How's Ember?" "Safe. We moved her to the place we discussed. Dr. Cross is with her, running more tests." Beth sat beside her father. "Dad, the whole station is talking about you. Humans especially. They're calling you brave. I'm not brave. I'm just doing what's right. That's what makes you brave." Beth took his hand. "We're going to fight this. I've been collecting signatures on a petition. Over 3,000 residents have signed so far demanding your release and Ember's protection." Roy was stunned. 3,000? And growing every hour. Turns out a lot of beings on this station are tired of being treated like they don't matter. You gave them something to believe in. Before Roy could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Red lights flashed in the corridor outside the cell. "What's happening?" Roy asked. Beth pulled out her communicator and checked it. Her face went pale. "It's the life support system. Something's wrong with the main processor. They're saying it's corrupting the entire network." "How bad?" "Bad. If they can't fix it in the next few hours, the atmosphere regulators will fail. All 50,000 residents could die." Roy stood up. "You need to get Ember." "What?" "Why? She can fix it. I've seen her repair technology. Her abilities are perfect for this. Dad, if we bring her out of hiding, they'll take her. Elder Frost will kill her. If we don't bring her out, everyone on this station will die, including her." Roy gripped the bars of his cell. "Beth, this is Ember's chance to show everyone what she can do. To prove that being different doesn't mean being worthless." Beth stared at her father for a long moment. Then she nodded and ran from the cell. 40 minutes later, chaos filled the administration center. Engineers crowded around computer terminals trying desperately to fix the corrupted system. The oxygen levels were dropping. Temperature controls were failing. People were panicking in the corridors. Elder Frost and the Draconis delegation stood to one side watching with cold detachment. To them, this was a problem for lesser species to solve. Then the doors opened and Beth entered, leading Ember. Everyone froze. The dragon walked slowly into the room, her dark red scales gleaming in the emergency lights. She was still small compared to the other Draconis, still different, but she held her head high, unafraid. Elder Frost's eyes widened with rage. "Seize that creature immediately! Wait!" Dr. Cross rushed in behind Ember, her datapad held high. "That dragon can save this station. Let her try. She is defective. She can do nothing. She's a Dimfire dragon," Dr. Cross shouted. "Her abilities are perfectly suited for interfacing with technology. She can fix the system before it fails completely." "Lies, there are no Dimfire dragons. That bloodline was eliminated millennia ago, was it?" Dr. Cross pulled up the images she had found, projecting them for everyone to see. Ancient texts and drawings filled the air. "Or did you just erase them from history because they didn't fit your idea of strength?" The Draconis delegation members shifted uncomfortably. Around the room, station residents who had gathered to watch stared at the images in amazement. Administrator Wellis looked between Elder Frost and the failing computer systems. Sweat dripped from his tentacles. The oxygen level warnings were getting louder. "We're running out of time," Beth said. "Either let Ember try or we all die together." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Administrator Wellis made his decision. "Do it. Let the dragon try." "This is outrageous," Elder Frost began. "This is survival," Wellis snapped. "My responsibility is to protect this station and its residents. Pride won't help us if we're all dead." Ember walked to the main computer terminal. The engineers backed away, giving her room. She placed her claws on the interface panel, and her scales began to glow with that soft white light. Roy, still locked in his cell down the corridor, couldn't see what was happening, but he felt the moment when Ember's power flowed through the station's systems. The light steadied. The temperature stabilized. The alarm slowly went quiet. In the administration center, everyone watched in amazement as code scrolled across the screens at impossible speeds. Ember's fire flowed through the circuits, not destroying them, but healing them. She found the corruption, isolated it, and removed it with precision that no computer could match. 15 minutes later, it was done. The system was clean and running better than it had in years. Ember stepped back, her scales dimming, and looked at the assembled crowd with tired but proud eyes. The room was silent. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. A human engineer, then another. Soon, dozens of beings were applauding, their various methods of showing appreciation filling the air. Elder Frost stood frozen, staring at Ember. For the first time in his long life, he looked uncertain. Dr. Cross walked to stand beside Ember. "This is what you tried to destroy. This is what you called defective. She just saved 50,000 lives using abilities your warrior caste considers worthless." Beth joined them, her hand resting gently on Ember's neck. "My father was right about her. He was right about all of it." Administrator Wellis cleared his throat. "Release Roy Palmer from detention immediately." "No," Elder Frost said, but his voice lacked its earlier power. "The human violated our protocols." "Your protocols nearly killed everyone on this station," Wellis replied. His tentacles were steady now, his voice firm. "Roy Palmer saved a life, and that life just saved all of ours. I'm not just releasing him. I'm giving him a commendation." The crowd erupted in cheers. News of what happened on Danyland Station spread across the galaxy within hours. Ember's feat was recorded and shared on every communication network. Species that had never questioned the Draconis suddenly had something to think about. Roy was released from detention to find hundreds of people waiting for him. They cheered when he emerged, and several humans lifted him onto their shoulders despite his protests. Ember was there too, standing with Beth and Dr. Cross. When Roy finally made his way through the crowd to reach her, he wrapped his arms around her neck and held her close. "You were amazing," he whispered. Ember made a soft, happy sound. But the celebration was short-lived. Within a day, the Draconis delegation called an emergency meeting with station leadership. Roy, Beth, Dr. Cross, and Ember were summoned to attend. The meeting room was filled with important beings from across the galaxy. Representatives from a dozen species had arrived to witness what would happen next. Elder Frost and his delegation sat on one side of the room, their expressions cold. Administrator Wellis sat at the head of the table, looking uncomfortable. Roy stood with his small group Ember beside him. The dragon had grown more confident since saving the station. Her scales were brighter, and she held her head high despite the hostile stares from the other Draconis. Elder Frost spoke first. What happened 3 days ago was unfortunate but does not change the fundamental facts. The creature you call Ember was designated for termination under Draconis law. She remains the property of our delegation. She's not property, Roy said firmly. She's a living being. You have no standing to make that determination. You are human. Your species is barely evolved beyond primitive tribalism. Murmurs of anger rippled through the human observers in the room. Beth's hands clenched into fists. Let me understand, said Ambassador Green, the human representative to the Galactic Council. She was a dignified woman with white hair and sharp eyes. You want to execute a being who just saved 50,000 lives because she doesn't meet your standards of perfection? Our standards have maintained our civilization for 10,000 years, Elder Frost replied. We will not abandon them for the sake of sentiment. Then perhaps your standards are wrong, Ambassador Green said quietly. The room erupted in arguments. Species took sides. Some supported the Draconis out of fear or tradition. Others spoke against them, emboldened by Roy's example. The meeting devolved into chaos. Ember watched it all with sad eyes. Roy could feel her trembling beside him. Then Dr. Cross stood up and activated her datapad. May I speak? Administrator Wellis, desperate for order, gestured for silence. Please, Dr. Cross, proceed. Dr. Cross projected her research findings for everyone to see. The images of ancient Dimfire dragons appeared, along with her analysis of Ember's unique abilities. What you see here is proof that the Draconis species was once diverse, she explained. Dimfire dragons were an essential part of their civilization, serving as healers, builders, and mediators. They had different abilities than warrior dragons, but those abilities were equally valuable. This is propaganda, one of Elder Frost's advisors hissed. It's history. Your history. Recovered from your own archives. Dr. Cross pulled up more documents. 5,000 years ago, the warrior caste began a campaign to eliminate Dimfire dragons. They were called weak, defective, unworthy. Within 3 generations, they were nearly extinct. But not completely extinct. She gestured to Ember. Ember represents a bloodline that survived against all odds. She is proof that genetic diversity is a strength, not a weakness, and her actions prove that different abilities have different applications. She can do things that no warrior dragon could ever do. Elder Frost stood abruptly. Enough of this. The past is dead. The Draconis have evolved beyond the weakness of the Dimfire bloodline. Have you? Ambassador Green asked. Or have you simply forgotten what it means to value all forms of strength? Before Elder Frost could respond, a new voice spoke from the entrance to the room. She speaks truth, Elder Frost. Perhaps it is time we listened. Everyone turned to see 3 young Draconis entering the room. They were smaller than the delegation members, their scales varying shades of bronze and copper. They moved with hesitation, as if afraid they would be struck down. Who are you? Elder Frost demanded. The lead dragon, a female with bronze scales, spoke in a trembling voice. My name is Cinder. These are my brothers, Ash and Cole. We are from Skorath, from the Outer Territories. We came when we heard about Ember. Came for what purpose? To show you that she is not alone. Cinder took a deep breath. We are Dimfire dragons. We have hidden our entire lives, pretending to be normal, suppressing our abilities. But when we saw what Ember did, when we saw her stand proud despite your hatred, we knew we could not hide anymore. 2 more Dimfire dragons entered the room, then 3 more. Within minutes, 12 dragons stood together, all different from the powerful warrior caste. Some were small like Ember. Others had unusual colorings or different body shapes. But all of them held their heads high now, refusing to be ashamed any longer. Elder Frost stared at them in shock. This is impossible. The Dimfire bloodline was eliminated. You tried to eliminate us, Cinder said. But we survived in the shadows in the forgotten places of Skorath. We survived because we had no choice. But we will not hide anymore. The revelation stunned the room into silence. Even the other Draconis delegation members seemed shaken. Ambassador Green seized the moment. It seems you have a choice, Elder Frost. You can continue trying to erase a part of your own species, or you can accept that strength comes in many forms. The Galactic Council will not support genocide, another ambassador added. Not even cultural genocide. Elder Frost looked around the room at all the watching faces. For the first time, Roy saw something like fear in the ancient dragon's eyes. Fear of change. Fear of being wrong. I need time, Elder Frost said finally. This is not a decision I can make alone. I must consult with the High Council on Skorath. Take your time, Administrator Wellis said. But while you consult, Ember will remain under the protection of Danyland Station. Anyone who attempts to harm her will be arrested regardless of their species. The meeting ended, but the consequences were only beginning. Over the next few days, more Dimfire dragons arrived on the station. They came from hidden communities across the galaxy, drawn by hope and the chance to finally live openly. Roy's small quarters became a gathering place. Dragons who had spent their lives in fear came to meet Ember, the one who had sparked their revolution. They brought stories of hiding, of suppressing their gifts, of watching family members disappear when their differences were discovered. Roy listened to each story with growing anger and sadness. How many dragons had died because they were different? How many had never gotten the chance that Ember had? One evening, Roy sat with Ember on the observation deck watching the stars. The dragon had barely left his side since the meeting. She seemed to understand that she had become a symbol of something larger than herself. Are you okay? Roy asked softly. Ember looked at him with those golden eyes and made a soft sound. She pressed her head against his chest and Roy held her, feeling the warmth of her scales. I know it's scary, he said, being the one everyone looks to, carrying all that hope and expectation. But you don't have to carry it alone. You've got me. You've got Beth. You've got all those other Dimfire dragons who finally have the courage to be themselves because of you. Ember lifted her head and looked out at the stars. Then she spread her wings, the injured one still a bit stiff but functional now. She looked powerful and graceful, no longer the broken creature Roy had found in the trash compactor. Beth joined them on the observation deck. Dad, you need to see this. She pulled up a news feed on her datapad. The image showed massive protests on Skorath, the Draconis homeworld. Thousands of young dragons were gathering in the capital, demanding change. They carried banners with Ember's image on them. It's spreading, Beth said with wonder. What started here is becoming a movement. Roy watched the images, hardly believing what he was seeing. A simple janitor who had saved one dragon had somehow sparked a revolution. What have we done? He whispered. Something amazing, Beth said. She put her arm around her father. You showed the galaxy that kindness matters, that every life has value, that standing up for what's right even when you're scared can change everything. That night Roy couldn't sleep. He lay in bed thinking about what would come next. Elder Frost would return with the High Council's decision. It might be favorable or it might be terrible. There was no way to know. But whatever happened, Roy knew one thing for certain. He had made the right choice. Saving Ember had been right. Standing up to Elder Frost had been right. Helping those other Dimfire dragons find their courage had been right. The galaxy might not change overnight. The Draconis might not suddenly become accepting and kind, but change had begun. And sometimes that was enough. 6 months had passed since Ember saved Danyland Station. Roy pushed his mop across the same floors he had cleaned for 20 years. But everything felt different now. People greeted him as he worked. Children, both human and alien, waved when they saw him. He was no longer invisible, but Roy had chosen to return to janitorial work. Administrator Wellis had offered him a position in station management, but Roy had declined. He liked his simple life. He liked the quiet of the late shifts and the satisfaction of making things clean. The difference now was that people respected him for it. He finished cleaning the observation deck and took a break, looking out at the stars. A ship was arriving, its hull decorated with the symbols of the Draconis. But not the warrior caste symbols. These were different, older, the symbols of the Dimfire dragons. Roy smiled. Another group of Dimfire dragons was coming to the station. They came every week now, seeking refuge and community. The lower levels of Danyland had been transformed into a sanctuary for them. What had once been forgotten maintenance areas were now filled with life and hope. Roy, he turned to see Ember flying toward him. Her wing had healed completely, and she moved through the air with grace and power. She landed beside him, her scales gleaming like polished garnets in the light. "Look at you," Roy said, pride filling his voice. "Flying like you were born to it." Ember nuzzled his hand affectionately. She wore a new collar now, one she had chosen herself. It bore the symbol of the Dimfire dragons, and words in ancient Draconis script that meant bridge builder. That's what Ember had become. A bridge between the old Draconis ways and a new future. A bridge between species. A bridge between fear and hope. Beth approached them, carrying a datapad. She worked as an official liaison now, helping coordinate the integration of Dimfire dragons into station life. The position had given her purpose and pride. "Dad, Ember, you're needed in the council chamber. Elder Frost has returned with the High Council's decision." Roy's stomach tightened. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The Draconis High Council had spent months debating what to do about the Dimfire dragons. The decision they announced today would affect thousands of lives. They walked together to the council chamber, Ember between Roy and Beth. When they arrived, the room was packed with representatives from dozens of species. The 12 Dimfire dragons who had first revealed themselves stood in a group, Cinder at their front. Elder Frost stood at the center of the room, but he looked different, older, tired. The past 6 months had changed him too. "We are ready to hear the High Council's decision," Administrator Wellis announced. Elder Frost took a deep breath. "The High Council of Skorath has deliberated extensively on the matter of the Dimfire dragons. We have consulted ancient texts. We have examined historical records. We have debated the nature of strength and the meaning of our civilization." He paused, and Roy could see the struggle in the old dragon's eyes. "The Council has determined that the elimination of the Dimfire bloodline was an error, a grave error that has weakened our species and corrupted our culture." Elder Frost's voice grew stronger. "We were wrong. For 5,000 years we were wrong." Gasps filled the room. Cinder and the other Dimfire dragons clutched each other in disbelief. "The High Council formally apologizes to all Dimfire dragons and their descendants. We acknowledge the suffering we have caused. We acknowledge the lives we have taken, and the gifts we have squandered." Elder Frost looked directly at Ember. "And we acknowledge that a human janitor showed us wisdom that our ancient civilization had forgotten." Roy felt tears prick his eyes. Effective immediately, all Dimfire dragons are welcomed back to Skorath with full rights and honors. The old laws declaring them defective are abolished. New laws will be written to protect diversity within our species. Elder Frost stepped forward. "But words are not enough. We must take action to repair the damage we have done." Another Draconis entered the room, one Roy had never seen before. She was ancient, her silver scales marked with centuries of wisdom. She moved slowly but with great dignity. "This is High Elder Dawn," Elder Frost said. "She is the oldest living Draconis and a member of the High Council. She has something to say." High Elder Dawn looked around the room with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of ages. "I was young when the persecution of Dimfire dragons began. I watched it happen. I said nothing. For that cowardice, I carry eternal shame." She walked to where Ember stood. "Young one, you have shown courage that I lacked. You have reminded us of who we once were and who we could be again. The Draconis owe you a debt that can never be fully repaid." Ember lowered her head respectfully. High Elder Dawn placed a claw gently on Ember's neck. "I propose that Ember be granted the title of Cultural Ambassador. She will serve as a bridge between the Dimfire dragons and the warrior caste, helping to heal the divisions in our society." High Elder Dawn looked at Roy. "If her chosen family agrees." Everyone turned to look at Roy. He felt the weight of thousands of eyes on him. "It's not my decision to make," Roy said quietly. "It's Ember's." Ember looked at Roy, then at Beth, then at all the Dimfire dragons who had found courage because of her. She spread her wings and made a sound that resonated through the room, a sound of acceptance and determination. She agrees. Dr. Cross translated from her position near the door. She had been studying Draconis vocalizations and could understand much of what Ember communicated. High Elder Dawn nodded with satisfaction. Then it is done. Ember will divide her time between Skorath and Danyland Station, helping to rebuild what we destroyed. The chamber erupted in celebration. Dimfire dragons cried with joy. Human observers cheered. Even some of the warrior caste Draconis showed signs of approval. But Elder Frost approached Roy quietly away from the crowd. The old dragon looked at the human janitor for a long moment. "You humbled me," Elder Frost said. "A human with no power, no status, no strength by our standards. Yet you possessed something we had lost. Simple decency, the ability to see value where we saw only waste." "Everyone deserves that," Roy said, "no matter who they are or what they can do." "Yes, I understand that now." Elder Frost paused. "The High Council wishes to honor you as well. We want to offer you a position as advisor to the Draconis government on matters of cultural reform." Roy shook his head gently. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm happy being a janitor." "How can you be satisfied with such simple work when you could have power and influence?" "Because simple work is honest work. Because making things clean and functional matters. Because I help keep this station running and there's dignity in that." Roy smiled. "Besides, someone needs to clean up after all these dragons." Elder Frost stared at him, then did something Roy had never seen a Draconis do. He laughed, a deep rumbling sound that shook his massive frame. "You are a strange being, Roy Palmer. But perhaps that is exactly what the galaxy needs more of." The celebration continued long into the station's night cycle. Roy eventually slipped away from the crowd, tired and overwhelmed. He made his way to the observation deck, his favorite spot for thinking. Ember found him there as he knew she would. She settled beside him, and they looked out at the stars together in comfortable silence. "You're going to Skorath," Roy said finally. "You're going to be important and influential. You're going to change the world." Ember made a questioning sound. "I'm proud of you. So proud. But I'm going to miss having you around all the time." Roy put his arm around her neck. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, you know that? Finding you was like getting a second chance at being a father, at being useful, at mattering." Ember pressed her head against his chest and Roy felt her warmth. Then she pulled back and looked at him with those golden eyes. She made a series of sounds, complex and emotional. Beth appeared behind them. "She says you'll always be her father. That distance doesn't change family. That you taught her the most important lesson anyone could learn." "What lesson?" Roy asked. Beth smiled. "That every being deserves someone who sees their worth. Someone who will fight for them even when the whole galaxy says they're not worth fighting for." Roy's vision blurred with tears. "You're going to make me cry, both of you." They stayed on the observation deck until dawn, the three of them together. A simple janitor, his engineer daughter, and a dragon who had changed the galaxy. Months turned into years. Ember split her time between Skorath and Danyland Station just as promised. She helped establish the first Dimfire Academy, where young dragons learned to embrace their unique abilities. She mediated disputes between the warrior caste and the Dimfire dragons. She became a symbol of hope and change throughout the Draconis civilization. But every few weeks she returned to Danyland Station. She returned to the simple quarters where Roy still lived. She returned to the observation deck where they had spent so many quiet evenings. She returned to the family that had chosen her when her birth family had thrown her away. Roy continued his janitorial work, refusing every offer of promotion or prestige. But his impact rippled outward in ways he never expected. Other species began reconsidering how they treated their own outcasts and marginalized populations. The Pelians established programs to help children with developmental differences. The Rothians reformed their caste system. The Brevians created new laws protecting genetic diversity. Humanity's reputation in the galaxy transformed. They were no longer seen as primitive or insignificant. They were respected as the species that valued compassion over power. The species that saw potential where others saw only waste. 5 years after Roy found Ember in the trash compactor, A statue was erected in the central plaza of Danyland Station. It showed a man in a simple gray uniform, his hand resting on the neck of a dragon. The plaque beneath read, "The bond that changed everything." Roy tried to avoid the plaza after that. The attention embarrassed him. But sometimes, late at night when his shift was done, he would stand there and look at the statue. He would think about how strange life was, how one small act of kindness could ripple outward and change the course of civilizations. On one such night, Ember found him there. She had grown larger over the years, more confident and powerful, but she still nuzzled his hand like she had when she was injured and afraid. "People keep calling me a hero," Roy said to her. "But I'm not. I just did what anyone should do. I saw someone who needed help and I helped them." Ember made a sound that Dr. Cross had taught them meant exactly. "What?" Beth appeared from the shadows. She had been working late, as usual. "She's saying that's exactly what makes you a hero, Dad. Not some grand gesture or display of power. Just simple decency. Just seeing value in a life that everyone else decided didn't matter." Roy looked at his daughter, then at Ember, then at the statue of them together. He thought about Maria, his wife, and hoped she could see what their family had become. Not bound by blood but by choice. Not powerful by any traditional measure but strong in the ways that truly mattered. "Come on," Roy said finally. "Let's go home. I've got a shift in the morning, and you know how Administrator Wellis gets when the floors aren't properly cleaned." They walked together through the quiet station, past closed shops and dark corridors. A simple janitor, his daughter, and a dragon. A family that had changed the galaxy by refusing to accept that anyone was worthless. Behind them, the statue gleamed in the starlight. Above them, ships from 100 worlds came and went, their passengers carrying the story of Roy and Ember to every corner of known space. And in the distant future, when historians studied this era, they would point to this moment as a turning point, the moment when the galaxy learned that true strength wasn't about power or perfection. It was about seeing the worth in every being. It was about standing up for what was right even when you stood alone. It was about the simple, revolutionary act of choosing kindness over cruelty. Roy Palmer, the janitor who changed everything, went back to his quarters and went to sleep. Tomorrow he would wake up and clean floors. He would push his mop and empty trash bins. He would do the simple, honest work he loved. And the galaxy would be better for it.